without further ado, I'm going to talk about expanding your burn window. So how many people have burned in the growing season? So I would like to tell you 2 reasons why you should expand your burn season and burn in the growing season. This is a graph about the recent change in the NACs, the PM 2.5 standard. PM 2.5 is those little inhalable things that come from the combustion of wood, smoke, and oil that can get in your lungs. So the EPA made a more strict standard, and that's good, right? We don't want to be burning. We don't want to be breathing that stuff. You can see the red line used to be 12, and all the monitors around Georgia were doing fine. Well, they strengthened it and they lowered it to 9. Now you see many monitors across the state are struggling to meet that new standard. What does that mean? Well, if you guys remember a few years ago in Atlanta, they were in non-attainment for ozone. Surprise. And what happened was Georgia Forestry said, you know what? In these counties surrounding Metro Atlanta, there will be no growing season burns. Just boom, that's it. Not episodic burn ban, but absolute burn ban. The map on the side shows the number of counties that might be in non-attainment if we stick with the current values. Now, this is scary, right? Everybody's on board with prescribed burning, even the EPA. So I'm working at the national level right now to try to protect the ability to burn. But what we really, really need from you guys is to be smoke savvy. Manage your smoke well. Know how to pick the right fire weather so you can get your smoke to lift up and not impact your smoke sensitive targets like roads and hospitals and densely populated areas where those PM 2.5 monitors are. Make sure you're running V-Smoke. When you call Georgia Forestry for a permit, they're going to be running V-Smoke, but it's a simple tool that you can run yourself and see where your heavy smoke is going to go. We developed this really cool thing called Georgia Winds and Air Quality, and it shows you real-time weather and where you are located in the state in relation to conservation properties and where the winds are blowing. So you can see if your smoke would be blowing toward one of those monitors. So be smoke savvy, because when it's a good day to burn, guess what? All y'all are going to be wanting to burn, right? The first couple weeks in March across the entire Southeast is nuts. Everybody is burning because it's great fire weather. This is almost 1,000 permits across the state of Georgia, almost 40,000 acres burning. This wasn't even the biggest day. This is just one thing that Ken Parker sent me. So you can imagine all that smoke is going up into the air and possibly filling the airshed. A couple months ago, my guys at Die Lane called me up and they're like, Shan, I can't get a permit today. I'm like, dude, what are you doing wrong? So I looked up the fire weather. I'm like, this looks like a perfect day to burn. I would have called for a permit. I couldn't figure it out. So I called my buddy Ken Parker, and he's like, Shan, it has been a great week of burning, and everybody's been burning, and the smoke is lifted, and that's good. But then today, also, Florida Gators, they were sending some smoke our way too. That airshed filled. And then despite being good fire weather, it was not good smoke weather. So they limited their permits. So just know that we're a part of a community of an airshed, right? So what we can do is expand our burning across the state into different parts of the year when other people aren't burning. We can see there are fire adapted and fire maintained habitats across the entire state of Georgia. So really, burning comes down to what your objectives are. And you've heard a lot of great talking about, is it wildlife? Is it timber management? Is it hunting, aesthetics? You really need to know why you're managing and using fire. And that will help you pick the kind of fire that you want to set. One thing to think about, and this has been mentioned before, is are you in the restoration phase or in the maintenance phase? A lot of times when Georgia DNR buys properties, it's the stuff that's for market value. So it's been beaten up. It hasn't been managed well. It's fire suppressed. It's really, really hard to get fire back in that. So those first days, those first times that you burn, you have to have a really conservative prescription, right? You're probably burning in the dormant season. You're doing a higher RH, a lower temperature. And then after that, when you move into the maintenance phase, that weather prescription is wide open and you can burn throughout the year, but be patient with it, right? One cool thing that I've seen, and this was like transformative at Reed Bingham State Park. I'd been burning the lower part of the park for years, and there was like this 200 acres north of the boardwalk that they didn't have any trails, and it was just like a jungle, and nobody went up there. And I went up there one day. I was like, man, this is some really good fire habitat. It just needs fire, but it was scary, right? So we burned it in the dormant season, and then I came back on a 1 year rough and burned it in the growing season. And it had plenty of fuel to do that. And that just absolutely changed that place. So think about that. One thing you do have to remember, though, something wins and something loses with fire, right? Fire is not going to be the panacea for everything. So that's why you really need to know what your objectives are and understand any time of the year that you're burning, something's going to benefit and something else might be harmed. Tighter weather prescriptions for these first entry burns. How can you overcome that? Night burning. Wow. What do you guys think about that? I know it's hard to get a permit at night. You got to be like in the middle of nowhere. You got to have no smoke sensitive targets. But Seminole State Park, Moody Forest Natural Area, Alapaha River, these are places when the weather conditions are super special and right that you can burn at night. And this is at Alapaha River. You can see a first entry burn, and it was just crazy thick, right? But we burned carefully at night and had a really transformative burn. It was amazing. One thing you can do is set yourself up with dormant season fires, anticipating that you're going to have growing season fires. So we had a learn and burn a few weeks ago at a PBA in Southwest Georgia called Deerwood. And you can see the map on the left. They did patchwork burning, right? They burned here, they burned there. And those two green units we were setting up for a learn and burn, right? So I had black all around me, and George gave me one person. He's like, Shan, I want you and Grace to go burn that 20 acres. Now I'm with the DNR. I have a wonderful crew in the back, and I have lots of toys. And I'm like, I am uncomfortable with this. But he's like, no, it'll be fine. You have black on both sides. So Grace and I jumped on a UTV, and we each had a drip torch, and we slowly drove down the road that bisected that long, narrow gray thing under Point Charlie, and just strung fire on both sides of the road. And we just let it flank and walk to the black. No holding, no interior, nothing, no spotting. It was amazing. So think about burning in the dormant season to build a lot of black so that you have a special place you want to burn in the growing season. You don't have those holding concerns, and you can spend your energy painting fire on the landscape. Now, one thing about growing season burns, they are hard on you, right? Hydrate or die. That's my motto. Also, my secret weapon is V8, because what are y'all sweating? You're not just sweating water, right? You're sweating electrolytes, and you can get wonked out pretty fast in the growing season if you're not replenishing yes, that is Isis, and she is the model of hydration. This was last week at Seminole State Park. You got to stay hydrated and stay on top of people, make sure people are eating. Now, I don't recommend this to landowners, but growing season first entry burns can be really effective in places like isolated wetlands. That's pretty scary. Look at that picture on the right. That's an isolated wetland. We had a long range spot coming from that. Now, we put firefighters right there on the line because we knew that was going to blow up, and that was okay. But it was a long range spot. So the lesson we learned from that, A, transport winds are pretty important. So, make sure you're following your burn plan with that. But B, put those isolated wetlands way inside your unit. So if you have streaming burning pieces of palmetto, they land in what you're burning. Now, I know that sounds scary, right? And I wouldn't recommend you going out by yourself doing a first entry burn in the wetland. Well, guess what? This is why you have ASH. And this is why you have the PBA. There are some excellent, experienced people that come help you, and you can pool your resources with other landowners, and you guys are like the IVT of private people. So I highly recommend that. Growing season burns and ground nesting birds. Guess what? We burned this in February at Seminole State Park, and we were checking our unit the next day, and Bachman sparrow, pretty rare bird. You hear him singing, and that's cool. We saw him in our burn unit. It was amazing. So if you guys are concerned about growing season burns, I entreat you to check out the research from National Wild Turkey Federation and others that show that a lot of birds, turkeys, will re-nest. If they lose a nest at the beginning of their season, they'll do it again. A lot of times those nests don't even get burned up because they're in a place that the fire's not going to get to. The habitat heterogeneity, or that mosaic burn that they talked about, is really important. I know it's so much fun to go around with the drip torch and just make everything black, but we're trying to mimic the natural fire that happened, right? And it would walk here and walk there and go out in places. So try to mimic that. And growing season burns are awesome for ground nesting birds. And even if you do lose a few turkey nests, the habitat improvement is going to support a much, much higher population in the future. Now, another thing people are concerned about is burning young longleaf. Yes, longleaf is a fire-adapted species, and you can burn it almost any time in the year. These little fricasseed longleaf are going to be fine. When the young ones had that white candle that's very supple, that's when you can kill them. So don't burn. There's like 3 weeks in the springtime when you see these candles. Now, that top picture, you see the needles are starting to protect that candle. And then when they harden off and they're covered with those needles, it's fine to burn again. You can burn in the growing season, even young longleaf. Definitely give them 2 years after planting, but don't be afraid to do growing season burns in young longleaf. Another thing to think about longleaf is they need mineral soil. So if you see to grow, so if you see a really good cone crop coming, get that burn in August, September before those cones drop those seedlings, and then they'll have mineral soil to go into. Now, the other thing to think about is if you have a good cone crop and you got a bunch of seedlings, don't burn for a couple years, right? Because you're burning up your recruitment. So think about the ecology. Fall burning is really good for site prep if you're trying to prepare an area to plant. If you're burning in the woods, just be careful about scorch. Tony talked about scorch. Now, in the fall, if you're knocking things back and they're really scorched, they got to sit there all winter without as many leaves, right? So be really, really careful about fall burning and not scorching at that time. Duff fires. Duff is that buildup of organic material at the base of mature longleaf trees. And you think, oh, it's a longleaf, I can burn it. It's no problem. Well, we bought Moody Forest natural area outside of Baxley in 2003, 75 years of fire suppression. And if we'd gone out there willy-nilly and burned it, we would have killed those on longleaf pines because the feeder roots are in that duff. So we had to write an extremely narrow prescription. Our first burn in there, because we were looking at other people that had burned longleaf, and we learned from them. It was 1 day after 2 inches of rain, 20-mile-an-hour surface wind. We did not want a backing fire. We did not want residence time to catch a ground fire. And that on the right is a ground fire. And some people argue it's the killing of the feeder roots that kills the tree. And some people argue that it's like collaring the tree, like burning the cambium. So be careful if you have duff. Wiregrass. So you might see wiregrass flowering with a dormant season burn, but as I mentioned earlier, it's not setting a viable seed. So you really, really do have to do a late growing season burn if you want that viable wiregrass seed. Mid-story control is amazing in the growing season because think about that. They're sending their water and stuff up and down. And if you hit sweet gum in the growing season, you are going to hammer it and it's going to be awesome. And as you've heard before, you guys want to know where this saying came from? So a few years ago, I was invited to talk about fire. I'm like, oh, I love talking about fire. It's like, can you talk about seasonality versus frequency? It's like, oh, yeah. I got this. It's like, I was an English major, so I'm going to read all the research and I'm going to come up with the best presentation you've ever seen. Oh my gosh, like I'm reading all these papers and everybody's pointing fingers at the others like, this is wrong, I don't know, this, that. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? All these people are going to be watching me. And so I came up with this catchphrase. Of course, my husband's like, don't use the word in Kindles, you're going to mess it up. But it caught on. And now Burner Bob has adopted it. And it's really, really true. Pyrodiversity, changing up your seasonality, your intensity, and your scale is really going to promote and inspire biodiversity. All right, how'd I do on time? Any questions? Mary, now you want to set up the next one? Set up the next one? I'm fired. And now, our keynote speaker to tie it all together. Yes. Oh, Control L puts it into viewer.